Neil Gaiman has probably been my favorite writer in media as a whole ever since I first read American Gods. He has been at the helm of masterpiece after masterpiece, with Coraline, The Graveyard Book, The Good Omen, and the topic of discussion today, The Sandman. As I've made clear before, I read a lot of comic books, but rarely have I ever stumbled upon something as beautiful as Neil Gaiman's run of The Sandman. It was one of the most fascinating tales of fantasy I have ever consumed from any form of media, probably only stumped by two other works in my opinion, Death Note and American Gods, when it comes to fantasy world building and gripping characters based off of known mythology.
I love Lucy. How the you float?
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
But that doesn't mean they don't come with their fair share of problems and criticisms. And I would love to deep dive into one of the most unique works in three mediums. A story that got to be told first written in comics, the medium of pure visuals, then into a marvelous audiobook, the medium of pure sound, and finally into a stunning television series, an amalgamation of visuals and sound. What is more unique about these two adaptations is that all were created, helmed and produced by the creator of the original, Neil Gaiman, and therefore not reworked by a different conscience, but rewritten by the creator of the source material.
I'm afraid so.
A common criticism books and comic adaptations get when they turn into film or television series is that they don't respect the source material, changing things that shouldn't get changed and therefore changing the meaning of the story that the writer originally intended. That isn't the case when it comes to either of these adaptations, the audiobook or the Netflix series. Both were written and adapted by Neil Gaiman himself, and so any changes made were meant as improvements from the one who created them in the first place. But unfortunately, I cannot get into what I truly wish to discuss. What is the difference between storytelling between a tale told in still panels, mere audio cues, and a cinematic lens? Because the unjust negativity that shrouds this recent Netflix adaptation is something to be addressed. After the star cast that was the audiobook for The Sandman, it was difficult to see how the Netflix adaptation would top that when we finally see Morpheus come to life on our cinematic screen. Neil Gaiman, along with the casting directors Lucinda Sison and Natasha Vincent, were very vocal on how they want to take a good amount of time to find the perfect cast for the adaptation 33 years in the making. After a long wait, the cast list was announced, and with it came immense backlash from fans of the original comics. You see, for adapting the work from the comics to film, Neil Gaiman, along with the casting directors and the other EPs, had decided to make several changes in the gender, race, and sexual orientation of the characters from the original. Calling the show too woke or having forced representation that is unjust to the original 1989 source material was the criticism laid out by fans over social media. And among the many tweets and comments, there was also this one comment that read, "The reason why The Sandman was cool was because it had all kinds of gay, trans, etc. characters. But it was done in a way that felt dangerous and punk rock. The tone is totally off-brand when you try to make it normal and mainstream. It becomes boring. The book and the show couldn't be less alike as far as the way they make you feel." So apparently, queer culture is supposed to feel dangerous and punk rock to be cool and featured in media, because it being made to seem normal and mainstream makes queer culture boring to you. Oh, am I so sorry we weren't more interesting when we just seem like people to you. These comments genuinely bothered me, and as Neil Gaiman rightly said refuting these allegations, I give all the about the work. I spent 30 years successfully battling bad movies of Sandman. I give zero about people who don't understand or haven't read The Sandman, whining about a non-binary desire or that death isn't white enough. Watch the show. Make up your minds. So with high hopes but a reasonable amount of doubt, considering Netflix was behind adapting the comics, and they weren't kind to me the last time they did so, I watched The Sandman. And I must say, it is one of the best, or at least the most loyal adaptations to a comic or a novel I have seen till date. Doesn't mean it's a perfect show, but it is truly what I expected from The Sandman translating into film and even more. But more on that in part 2. Let's talk about representation and adaptation when it comes to the Sandman comics and the Sandman series. Representation is important in all forms of film and media, especially in the decades moving forward. And I will be the first one to say that, being from the queer community and from an underrepresented minority race. The backlash the Sandman got was from all fronts. People were mad that Lucifer Morningstar has always been represented as a masculine male and the show cast a woman. People were mad that Death was shown as a pale and white woman, but the show cast a black female. But to my alarming surprise, people were really mad that a lot of characters were made to be quote-unquote gay in the series, which wasn't the case in the comics. Before I move forward, I would firstly like to correct all those people who keep referring to the characters in the show as quote-unquote gay. All the characters being talked about weren't gay. They were from the LGBTQ community, which has many identities, many labels, one and only one of which is gay. The show did have an abundance of people from our community, but rarely did their orientations or sexual preferences overlap. The show had a mix of gays, lesbians, pansexuals, transsexuals, bisexuals, and more. If you see someone having an emotional or sexual connection with a person of the same biological body and coin them all as gay, you will obviously start believing that there are many of the same kind, though you are simply mistaken. But there is a difference between screenplays having a token queer character, a natural queer representation, and queer baiting. The two extremes, namely token queers and queer baiting, are the most common and also the bad forms of representing the community. And yet, that is what we see most in popular culture, Hollywood films, and popular TV shows. What this leads to is a normalization of the thought that this is how the LGBTQ+ community is like, and media that represents it otherwise is off-putting or too woke. The queer character has often been used as a role for comic relief, that being the only character trope they possess. So once this is stripped off the character, the sexuality becomes too blinding for the audience to handle. That is what seems to be occurring with The Sandman. A slow, gritty, gothic and dark show. The characters don't lend to comedy, making us experience their true desires and dreams as the person they are. Naturally, their sexuality comes to the forefront, not overriding their narrative, but being a part of it. I will admit, The Sandman doesn't perfectly lie at the natural queer representation scale either, being more common than mostly natural, but not in an on-your-face kind of way. Even with an abundance of queer characters, never is it made to feel that the unveiling or reveal of a person's non-cis sexual orientation is a big deal. It's simply normal and is treated much like it. Something cinema is often guilty of doing is that it makes a person revealing to the audience that they might not indeed be straight is a moment of revelation. A secret unknown only now discovered, making it the prime focus of the scene.
A what? A lesbian. No, she was an American.
What? I'm talking about sex, baby. She was a sapphic, a homosexual, a woman who loved other women. Surely you must be familiar. You do go to Smith College.
Emily, is that true? Oh my god. Who?
Sorry, can we change the subject?
That never happens in The Sandman. The queer nature of characters is never the prime focus, merely something that happens in the background. just another part of a person's complicated personality that is a part of a much larger narrative still in focus. But why change any of it from the source material? I mean, I just said a few minutes ago that the Sandman was a mere perfect form of art in the form it originated back in 1989. And I was born a decade after it and read it only 2 decades after that. Why not adapt the characters the way they were intended to be? Well, times change, and with it, so do how we wish to tell a story. That doesn't mean we must write according to what is politically or socially correct to the generation we are in currently. But we must write based on how our thoughts have changed from the times long gone. Neil Gaiman is the one who created and wrote the initial run. The one who knows the world of Morpheus the best. And if he himself chose to rewrite those characters and change aspects about their personality and sexuality, he is the one who knows what is best for the story, not the fan base. The same shadow of criticism was showered upon Neil Gaiman and his team back in 1990s during the original run of The Sandman. For that time, queer representation was so rare in comics and media that even the mere mention of 1 or 2 characters in the comics created a lot of discourse. Neil Gaiman had mentioned in an interview with the Queer Review that this was how he always intended his characters to be, and that back then he received a letter from the Concerned Mothers of America about the number of gay characters. He further went on to say that when he was writing it back in 1989 and even today, he had gay and trans friends. And if he left them out of his work, he wasn't representing the world he lives in or the world he perceives. And I do agree, that is the point of art. People need to truly understand that a wide range of representation is important. For more than half a century, film and media has been forcing cis relationships as the true form of love, making it feel so normal that a slight abundance of anything different feels like an outright political move. But these films with such roles help change the lives of so many people unknowingly by just letting them find out who they are. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want more film-oriented analysis. I'm a filmmaker myself, so I tend to analyze and often overanalyze films on a daily basis as is. Maybe I could share them with you too. Tell me in the comments what else you would like to see from me.